IEP might be a little foreign to you. You may have never heard of what an IEP is. I mean, there are so many acronyms being tossed around in the world, it's hard to really keep up. So I'll educate you on this one. An IEP is an individualized education program. The definition, or the Webster's, Merriam, whoever you'd like, they define it as a legally mandated plan created for students who require specialized instruction or accommodations or services to access and progress in school. In layman's terms, this is your new special ed. Now, there will be some people who are extremely offended by that term. And quite honestly, I want you to be. My name is Augustus C. Foster. Welcome to the Mantalk Monday Podcast. This is one of my totally coherent ramblings. Today, we're going to talk about the rise of IEPs and the incessant and consistent use of remedial learning. Now, as I sit here before you, I'm not just talking about IEPs or remedial learning or the former other R word that is no longer used. I'm not just talking about this from a standpoint of I've read some books. No. I'm speaking from first-hand experience. You see, back in the day, a long time ago, this young man was in the Los Angeles Unified School District. And in the first grade, I did great. The second grade, I did even better. The third grade, I did so great that when a mandated test was presented, I scored uncomfortably high for some people. I would say that because the school district approached my mother, God rest her soul, and said, "Hey, high aptitude for science, decent in math, excels in English, really good at sentence structure. This kid can explain subject, noun, verb, predicate in the third grade." Now, I would say that's threefold while I was able to do those things. First and foremost, God blessed me with a brain, took time out to make me. Shout out OG Big Sandals. The other, my mother at the time, who was a single mom. Really good time pouring into us, reading. We had encyclopedias at the crib, not the whole set, but we had the ones that we needed. We were regular library goers, regular readers. The other thing I could say really was a major factor in that and my success in my youth was I had the same teacher second and third grade. God rest her soul, Sharon Gaddis Wheeler. Amazing woman, poured into me. She literally treated children like they were own, whether that was taking time out to educate them or providing a good ounce of verbal discipline. I took the test, I passed. My mother felt from a standpoint of my social skills and my lack of being able to not know what to do with my hands, I should not skip a grade. So instead of going to the third to the fifth, I went to the fourth. And up until my mother's passing, I always told her, I blame you for that fourth grade incident. In the fourth grade, I was placed in a class and I had a ton of issues. I had anger issues pent up, abandonment issues from my father, always was fighting at school. I was suspended for school every year for fighting till I got to the 10th grade. Every year, minimum of once for fighting. And in the fourth grade, I was placed in the class. I gave some pushback. Some words were said, some expletives were sprinkled in there. And I was removed from one teacher's class and placed in another. Now, this is where I get to me understanding firsthand IEPs and remedial learning and that entire gamut. The class I was taken from was regular, a quote unquote regular class. The course I was put into was how people would jokingly describe it as kids who we grew up with who now times have changed, kids who we grew up with who departed school earlier than others. Their bus was not the same length as others. Now, I learned in that exact moment in the fourth grade that remedial learning, people who were developmentally disabled, those who actually had disabilities, learning deficiencies that could be articulated not by test, but by actual psychologists, counselors, and professionals. I learned that those things had no, there was no differentiator between them and a young black boy who talked back, or a young Latino boy who was deemed rambunctious. This is where you get your ADD or ADHD, and how they pushed my mother to give me Ritalin when in actuality she just said, I think he needs a little more discipline, somewhere else to put the energy, and at times, quite honestly, to sit the hell down. Now, I say all of that to say this. That is my experience with IEPs. Now, in that time, it wasn't an IEP. The response to your child having an articulable learning deficiency, or an ability to pick up or comprehend was met with, here's the class, what they would call back then slow courses, remedial classes. You would take your Part A and Part B course. If you were in junior high or high school, you took Math A, Math B. It was the same course, but they extended the time to allow you the opportunity to pass or succeed. Now, fast forward 30 years, and the game has changed. Like, this is, your IEPs, even though they were there, this is all birthed out of the Disabilities Act back in the 70s. They knew that people had these deficiencies, these inabilities to learn, and they said, okay, well, how do we combat this? How do we find a resolution? And the act was, well, you got all these kids in mostly public education. Let's make sure that they have access to the education. Let's make sure we get the parents engaged and involved, and let's provide a little bit of legal protections to ensure that we get success. It sounded great at the time, but over the years, that scope broadened as to what deemed a disability. How would public schools handle kids who may not have had a defined disability, but what if it was in the range of some things? This is where you run into, again, ADHD and ADD, things that they've said from the DSM and psychologists, professionals have come out years later and stated, it was such a broad spectrum of what it was, what they deemed as this disability, that it allowed them to lump in other people, which insert your school to prison pipeline. So now I'm not rambling because this is coherent. This is all foundational conversation for you to understand that from the 1970s up until today, there's always been an effort to make sure everyone was afforded an opportunity to get a good education. But the problem is there have been so many gaps and so many holes and so many issues and so many discrepancies as to what a disability is, to a point to where the paintbrush is so broad there was no more detail. Now we've gone from people who had actual real issues, such as dyslexia, or autism, or a speech or language impediment, to broadening it to general emotional and behavioral problems. Now I say problems because when someone has a issue at home life, that may not be taken into account. They just say, this is a kid who can't sit down. This is a kid who's combative, which in a lot of these areas, you're looking at kids who are disproportionately affected, most of them Black or brown. And in the majority of your IEPs, similar to your diagnoses in the 80s and 90s and 2000s for ADD and ADHD, majority boys. So why am I discussing this topic? Well, school just got back in. And there are a lot of parents who don't understand that for these IEPs, for this remedial learning or this individualized care, that at times you're putting your child behind an eight ball. Allow me to explain. Regardless of what I did as a youth, two things always followed me: certain interactions with law enforcement due to people I associated with in my youth, And the other was the suspension and expulsion I received in the fourth grade that followed me to 2 to 3 different school districts. It followed me through state related matters. Despite me becoming an adult, it was always a scarlet letter that I had attended this class. Now, there are parents who don't really understand this because even though the IEPs call for parental engagement, man, let's be honest. There are a lot of parents who don't have time to take 5 to 10 minutes to read to their kid, let alone sit up in some IEP meeting for 2 hours, let alone do all this paperwork for an assessment. So what ends up happening is the flawed system goes into default mode. Now your child, who could be an array of circumstances to why they're struggling with reading or math or literacy or science or whatever the topic, there might be a real legit reason that's outside of school. It could totally be home. I mean, the hierarchy of needs. Is this the kid who's hungry? Is this the kid who needs attention, love? Are they not getting the basic needs in their life? If I ain't got that, man, who the hell cares about school? So now, lack of parental engagement opens the door for school districts and states to do whatever they please. Where we are now in the year 2026 is schools grabbing kids between the second and fourth grade and pushing for early screening. Now, there are people who will say the reason you do the early screening is you get a chance to jump on improvement early. You could catch whatever this issue is before you reach some level of escalation. Then there are people like me who've seen the evidence, who've seen the statistics, who know the analytics. Then there are people who are really like me, who grew up in certain areas of poverty, certain financial thresholds, certain communities, knowing that despite the school district being able to provide smaller caseloads for special education teachers, despite counselors being able to disperse and delegate work, and even though there's a consistent level of progressive monitoring for these kids, there are people like me who also know and ask the question, what's the out? Because that's really the question. You see, these are systems designed to aid kids to get out of remedial education or slow classes or IEPs. It's designed to present them with the opportunity to progress. But what happens when a kid doesn't progress? What happens when a kid continues to repeat classes? What happens when they don't pick it up? There was recently a video that went viral, and there are people who absolutely hate the messenger, but they're skipping over the message. They're ignoring the amount of teachers in this school district that have either quit or transferred because, in their heart of hearts, they know we're not really able to help. What do you do when a child is placed in an IEP or on this program and it's strictly based on testing? And even though we've seen the biases in the test, it hasn't changed anything. So, what happens when you have a system that isn't culturally competent with respect to evaluations? That is where we are with IEPs. The reason I did this episode is I want parents, if you do have a child in an IEP, to do two things. Three, really. First and foremost, I want you to check on your kid. I want you to assess their mental, their physical, their emotional, their spiritual feelings on this. I want you to keep them encouraged because they may not fully grasp the situation that they're in. For them, it's, I'm just in these classes. But the social portion of seeing your friends go to whatever the quote unquote regular class is while you're going to this one, the somewhat loneliness or feeling out of place because you're not where everyone else is, the constant questioning. I want you to assess and check on your kids. Secondly, listen closely. Ears. You need to be at every meeting. If you have an IEP checkup, if you have a touch point, you need to be there. You need to ask about every single measurable goal. You need to ask, what's the exit strategy? What is the plan for my child to progress? Because again, in the 1970s, this was designed to make sure children in public education had the chance to graduate and get better and to learn. But what we've seen consistently is a drop in literacy rates. What we've seen post Charlie 19 is iPad, Chromebook, laptop, learn, independent learning from kids who are at an age where they don't even comprehend what time management is. And they're sent home with electronics that are so easy to crack that they always jailbreak them, but they're sent home with parents who, in today's world, there are no latchkey kids. They just know when they get home, their parent may not have time for them. So you have to monitor, you have to watch. What are the goals? How do we get done with this? You've got to engage your kid. You've got to ask real questions in the meetings. The last thing I need you to do, check yourself. My mother sat back years after I was removed from that class and graduated and got a medal and did well in high school and all of that and did cool in college. And my mother would always remind me of that incident in the fourth grade. And one day she semi broke down saying, I felt bad because I knew the shame that you felt because you were in that class with people who were my homeboys, but these were all dudes who years down the line, life did not go the way they probably expected, but their lives went exactly the way the system was designed. Here I was in my early 30s and my mother having a conversation on something that happened when I was 10 or 11 years old, and us having this deep discussion on the school to prison pipeline and how I was in that statistic that didn't end up there. And I reviewed the people in that class and said, the system isn't broken, it works just fine. Now, I'm not telling you that your kid is going to end up incarcerated or the number in their chest, but what I'm telling you is their back is up against the wall. There could be feelings of shame, could be feelings of lack of respect, confidence, and you might also feel that. So, along with checking in on them and being at all the meetings, make sure you're okay. Make sure you're good. Make sure that you have the tools you need to make sure you're engaging correctly and that you're fully in. Listen, man, these IEPs and remedial learning and all of these programs, they're tools. They're designed to help. But the educational landscape has totally shifted over the last 50 years. And as much as kids need structure and support and framework and guidelines, that's slowly dissipated with the advent of technology. So not only does your kid need you to avoid judging them for where they are, you need to not judge yourself, but you as the adult need to check and find out how you arrived at this point. This is your opportunity to create some level of partnership to work with your kids' school, and not so that they could just catch up, not so that they could, be with their peers, but really so that they grow emotionally, socially, and have a level of confidence. outside of the classroom. But it starts here. I will forever say that IEPs are not your friend. But what they are a heat check on your investment, on your heart, on your passion, on your diligence, and on what you really want your kid to do. Right now, you're listening, your kid's in an IEP, their back is up against the wall. Question is, are you going to help them fight their way out? I love y'all. I appreciate y'all. Till next time. Peace.